A lot of questions. Her friends say she often clashed with her more traditional family. That's something teenagers of all backgrounds face, but it can be especially hard for newcomers to Canada. Umbereen Inayet is a Pakistani Canadian. She's an advocate for women and a playwright. Her play, Meri Kahani, My Story, addresses the problem of abuse of South Asian women, and she joins me now. So, Umbereen, what was your reaction when you heard this story?
I felt a huge sense of sadness. I also felt a sense of validation in the work I do on talking about domestic violence in the South Asian community. In fact, my play, Meri Kahani, My Story, that I wrote with my colleague Meri we just did a showing of it on Sunday, partnering with the Sexual Assault Rape Crisis Center of Peel and India Rainbow for this new multicultural healing project they're launching to deal with violence in diverse communities. So validated in that, but also a sense of urgency in that there needs to be a lot more work done on anti-violence.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the clashes that newcomers to Canada face. Sure. What do you think about that? How difficult can it be for parents who come from the old country and come to Canada and have to deal with their teenagers in this new country that might have very different values than what they left behind?
It's very difficult and it's very complex. For newcomers who are coming to Canada, issues that relate to settlement are huge. Things like barriers to accessing services, language barriers, things like accessing employment can be difficult. Adapting to a new society that's completely different from your own is a challenge in and of itself. Sometimes people don't have supports. So experiencing that as a newcomer issue is really, really important to consider, as well as trying to raise children in a different society that you may not be used to is an issue, and vice versa. Being raised in a society that's quite different from your parents can be quite trivial and difficult as well.
So let's talk a little bit about that and some
Sure.
of the gender concerns that specifically teenage girls can face when their parents come from a more conservative, maybe a more patriarchal society.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, in North America, as well as a lot of other places, we do live in a patriarchal society. So this inequality of gender is something that crosses all cultures, and it's a struggle that women continue to deal with today. Younger women also are dealing with issues around self-esteem, trying to figure out who you are, trying to fit in, and also trying to come up with your own individual identity can be difficult. And if you're dealing with people who have more of a conservative outlook, you might come into some clashes.
It's an interesting question, I guess. Do you think that this is more of a problem within the South Asian Canadian community, or is this more an issue of control in the household?
I think it's a problem about abuse, and the issue of abuse deals with control and power. So it's not something that just is pointing to the South Asian community, it affects all communities.
What do you think needs to be done in order for people who are worried about this to speak out when they fear that there might be violence at home?
Well, I think there needs to be a lot of prevention education done within the community, within schools, not only the district school boards, but in link agencies where they deal with newcomers who are new to the country, also in religious places, churches, mosques, temples, gurdwaras. It's really important to have community leaders also speak out to their own community to say that, this is a real issue and this needs to be dealt with.
How much of a challenge is it for schools maybe to deal with this? Because they can kind of get caught in the middle, right, between teenagers who are just being teenagers in one sense and parents who are trying to parent in their own maybe culturally specific way, not to legitimize abuse in any way, but schools, how do they kind of fit in this and try and stop horrible incidents from happening?
I think everybody, as well as all service providers, need to be culturally sensitive to things, even though they may not be foreign to you. They may be a very real practice in other cultures. So being sensitive to that, however, talking about abuse as a global issue and having to do with the two fundamentals of power and control is the thing that needs to be focused on.
Are you hopeful that, the kind of work that you do in speaking out the play, that this is the kind of way that will bring this out in the open, whereas maybe in the past a lot of people would just stay silent?
Sure, because I truly believe that theater is a really good medium to discuss an issue that's safe. Because you can talk about a really sensitive issue that is provoking through avenues that you don't have to identify yourself in, but you can identify with the story. And actually through my play, I've had a few people call me, email me, tell me their stories, and in fact, not all of them are South Asian. So it goes to show that these issues are cross-cultural and people are connecting to them through the avenue of a play.
Umbereen, good to speak to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.